Hello and welcome, everyone. It's good to have such a nice turnout tonight. I'm Brian Hansen. I'm Vice President for Research here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and we're very honored this evening to be hosting Ma Zheng on our platform, who is the fifth Scholl Visiting Fellow here at the Chicago Council. I want to thank the Dr. Scholl Foundation for their continued support of the Council as well as of this particular fellowship. The Dr. Scholl Foundation created this visiting fellowship in 2012 with the idea of really building closer relationships between Chicago and China. And the idea is to bring prominent Chinese here to Chicago to engage in an extended stay to advance dialogue between Chicagoans and Chinese experts and to enhance Chicago's relevance and visibility with Chinese leaders. I also want to welcome a group of students from St. Ignatius College Prep. It's great to have you here today to enjoy this program. I want to make a few housekeeping points before we get started. Please note that the program is on the record and live streamed. We welcome your engagement in social media, but please do silence your phones when you're using them. Later, we will take questions not only from the audience with microphones in the audience, but also we have an online application, an app which you can participate in. And if you take your browser and go to chi.cnf.io, don't worry if you didn't get it typed in, it'll appear on the side screens as well. You'll be able to ask questions as well as vote on questions that have been submitted. A brief disclaimer. For nearly a century, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, nonpartisan platform for a variety of different perspectives to promote deeper understanding of global issues and active U.S. engagement in the world. The views expressed by the individuals here are their own and do not express the institutional positions or views of the Council. And introducing our fellow tonight, our Scholl Fellow, will be Pam Scholl. And before I turn it over to her, I just want to give you a little bit of background about her. She has been president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation since 1994. And previously, she spent time in the think tank world, so a strong affinity. For 17 years, she was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and she also serves on the board of directors of the Big Shoulders Fund, Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, and right here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Pam Scholl.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. The Dr. Scholl Foundation is really proud to support this annual visit by a thoughtful leader from China. We want continuity in dialogue between our countries. Tonight, I am thrilled to welcome the 2017 Visiting Fellow, Ma Zheng, founder of the Beijing-based Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. He is one of China's foremost environmentalists. We are honored that he is here with us and has spent this past 10+ days here in the Chicago area. Ma Zheng will share with us his insights on China's environment and his relentless work on improving the quality of air, water, and land for its 1.3 billion inhabitants. He has sought to draw attention to the harmful side effects of massive industrialization and urbanization that has propelled China's growth in the past decades. In the process, he's pioneered new technology, data-driven science for business, government leaders, as well as society to engage with one another. In other words, let's get the facts on the table. I'm excited that he has connected with so many of you during his visit here. Ma Zheng will be joined shortly by Karen Weigert on the stage in dialogue. She is the Council's Senior Fellow on Global Cities. Previously, she was Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago. First, just a minute of background, though, on Ma Zheng. He was originally a journalist before he became an activist and founded his environmental institution. Through that organization, he has launched China's first public database of environmental information. As he will explain, I'm sure, in other words, you can tell where pollution, land, water is coming from, what quantities, the pure data that we need to make informed and good decisions. His environmental advocacy work has earned him many awards, among them inclusion in Time Magazine's World's Most 100 Influential Peoples list, the 2015 Scholl Foundation Award for Social Entrepreneurship, and the 2012 Goldman Environmental Prize. He's been a longtime friend of the Chicago Council. In 2008, he met with the Leadership Study Mission Group at the 28-mile-long Tiger Leaping Gorge in Yunnan Province in China. I was thrilled to meet Ma Zheng and his lovely wife and young daughter earlier this week. What strikes me most is the courage he and his wife have had to confront not only the greatest challenge to China, but to our small planet. I welcome you, Ma Zheng.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. I really thank Pam for your gracious introduction and support. And I thank the council for hosting me, for receiving me. The past more than a week was really, I learned so much, experienced great cities, and I truly appreciate that. And you can see that the last 3.5 decades, we have built our cities, built our country, and China has have made remarkable progress in economic development. But in the meantime, some of our cities, including my home city, the Beijing, we have also lost some of the very crucial, resources. We have, sometimes our air quality can be degraded like this, sometimes too often like that. And air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution have exposed hundreds of millions of people to health hazards. And our resources being consumed in an unsustainable way, and environmental damage have become one of the major causes of all this social, even some of the social stability concerns. I trust that challenges of this magnitude and quite a bit major complexities cannot be addressed without extensive participation from the people. And the prerequisite for that is the access to information. So 2006, we set up the organization IPE, and the first project is to create a national environmental database and to help people access the data from all different kind of agencies, scattering data, but we help to compile that into a searchable database. All these years, increasingly, we see our data being used by different stakeholders. We started a program, the Green Choice Initiative, in 2007, hoping that the consumers will pay attention to pressure the major brands to green their supply chain in China. We're happy to see, all these brands, which some of them you must be familiar with, before they only buy from the cheapest, and but now they can understand who are polluting and who are not. We have so many brands started, before they sign contracts, started checking the IP's database. In 2013, along with the disclosure of the PM 2.5 data, the fine particles, we, along with 25 other NGOs, launched another initiative calling for the disclosure of the online monitoring data. Those some of the 12,000 largest factories in China. To our surprise, the government made a bylaw to require that to happen from 2014. I think this demonstrates China's political will to really control the pollution, because from this moment, you can see from our app, we compile that into a cell phone app because the government requirements is for this to happen on 30 different platforms. It's not quite easy to access. And we compile that into a mobile app called the Blue Map. Anyone can check that on the cell phone. Not only that, they can share that through social media. And we try to visualize that any of those corporations not in compliance will be in the color red. You can see in some provinces at that time, there were a lot of red dots there. And you can imagine local officials cannot protect those polluting factories forever when hour by hour, it shows quite clear some of them are breaking our laws. And people tweeted, people tagging the official account, and through this process, you can see in 5 years of time, in about 3-4 years of time, you can see quite some of them have turned from the color red to color blue, meaning that they started to, many of them become compliant with the standards. And then 2017, this year, we are in collaboration for the first time with a group of not just multinational companies. This is the local companies, the Chinese companies, a group of developers decided to use our data to bring their purchasing of some of the materials like iron, steel, and cement and glass, which are responsible, not the manufacturing emission, are responsible not just for a large proportion of local emission, but also a global carbon footprint is very big. In combination with the construction industry, the two put together means almost like 8% of the global carbon footprint. So there's a huge potential there to make emission control. We help them to make the first white list of among hundreds of those steel and cement manufacturers. And the next step, we are doing the research. At this moment, Chinese government is trying very hard to tighten the enforcement, and they have been sending out thousands of inspectors to all the different provinces, not just shutting down those polluting factories, but penalizing thousands of the local officials failing the environmental duties. And so for the first time, we see that many, the enforcement motivate the companies to really want to change behavior. Now we are trying to tap into the power of big data to help, develop solutions to help the companies, but also help everyone, any ordinary citizen to detect the environmental risks. So the dream is for anyone to be better aware of the environmental challenge risks anytime, anywhere in our country through the app. And finally, it's not just China, but it's also, now China is the current factory of the world, but the supply chain is migrating to the surrounding regions. And at this moment, we're having the neighboring countries also showing interest to try to work together. And we believe that there's a chance for us to use the data to connect the dots. We can see from this that a group of 4 major brands decided to link their logo, put on the locations of the factories of their suppliers in China. So anyone consumer anywhere in the world can click on that and understand whether their suppliers are in compliance. With some of them, it's hour by hour, whether they are really meeting their environmental commitment. So I would say that challenges are there, but we also see huge potential. I hope together we can come together to really tap into the potential to really green the global investment and also procurement and manufacturing. Thank you very much.
First of all, welcome again to Chicago.
Thank you.
We are absolutely delighted to have you and to have a chance to hear from you about the work that you've been doing. So I have to start by asking you this question. How do you have such good data?
Yeah, we started with very limited data, I have to say. 2006, when we got started compiling the environmental quality data, most of them are actually just annual, yearbook, so we compile them together. And on the air quality, it's every day we only access the daily average data. And not only data is limited, but the data quality is also problematic. At that time, 80% of our cities met our air quality standards. But after 2013, with the hourly disclosure of automatic monitoring, suddenly 80% of them fail the standards. So we can see, we started. So there's a progress made in China. First year only 2,000 records of violations. We only have 2,000 violators that we can find those data. But today we got 500,000 of them in our database. Through the process, it's not quite easy. We are making our efforts to apply for the data. We're also creating an index called Pollution Information Transparency Index with our partner NRDC. Linda Greer's there and her colleagues, and from the last 8 years, continue to use that to assess 120 cities of the level of transparency, and have them to not just identify the gaps, but allow them to share the best practice. So through the process, gradually the capacity is being built up, but also the trust. Gradually there have some trust built up because it shows that this transparency work has not disrupted our society, but it helped to mobilize stakeholders to come together to address the problem. So there's more sort of participatory decision-making gradually being accepted in China.
Can you talk more about that? I mean, trust is a huge thing, and it's not just about data. And you've expanded roles actually for residents to provide data and to be a part of this. How do you build trust like that?
Yeah, residents part, was more challenging because at the beginning, when we decided to do this database with my colleagues, we reviewed the situation and understand that data was important, but also could be very sensitive in our country. So we made a decision that we will use government-sourced monitoring as the basis of our data. When we look back, this helped to build some trust, because otherwise there will be a lot of questions, challenges about the legitimacy of our organization, the accuracy of the data, the capacity of the monitoring. There will be all kinds of questions. But because the data, it's not us, but the government who put those factories on the polluters list. This make it easier for them to not focus on us, but focus more on the data side. So it helped to build some, so things like this help to build some trust. And also, we, as a nonprofit organizations, set up the firewall between us and those who we supervise is important. And also build up some check and balance is important. The biggest power we have is the power to remove some of the companies any of the records from our database, because behind that, some of them need to spend up to 200 million yuan to fix their problem. So you can see there are always some pressure and sometimes temptation on us. And so we use this power to remove any records to a group of NGOs network. So whoever pressure us, the factories, and sometimes there are powerful contacts within the local government, we can tell them that, look, there are another 40 that you have to, convince. You have to have them to agree with you. So most of them will choose a different way. But I think the most important, we're not only exposing the problem, we're also creating a path towards solution. They can start it by making open explanation and then ended up eventually with a third-party audit, open audit, they can remove the records. I think that's also quite helpful. Most of them choose to explain what went wrong, how they fixed their problem. And during the process, we can all see that this has not undermined the economic growth, economic development, or killing jobs, but during the process actually helped to level the playing field, make sure that our economic growth is not just cleaner, but more efficiently.
When you think about that, one of the questions is always the cost of compliance. And essentially, you're shining a very bright light on companies. How do they become your partner? At the beginning, I would say those who put on the list, my colleagues all know that at the beginning, when they approached us, many of them are not in a very happy mood and could be quite, sometimes very angry and give us a lot of a hard time. And even more recent years, we still hear a lot of complaints with those who spent their resources, the money to fix their problem. Because in China, the cost of violation is much lower than the cost of compliance. So basically, our market is rewarding the polluting factories. So whoever spent money got disadvantaged. So although they have to do it because their buyers just require them. If they don't do it, then they lose business, so they spend this money, but they're not that happy. But more recent years, the past couple of years, things have changed more because, as I said, the central government is trying to tighten the enforcement and sometimes really started suspend the production or even shutting down some of the factories. I still remember last year I got one of the dye houses who really have complained me for 2-3 years, because they ended up spending a lot of money. And last year he came to me and really he said, I want to thank you. I mean, it shocked me, and he said, I want to thank you because so many of my neighboring factories have been shut down. 80 of them, dye houses, have been shut down in that for failing the wastewater standards. In China, that fashion industry discharged 2.5 billion tons of textile wastewater every year, highly damaging to the waterways in the coastal regions. And now finally, there has been more enforcement, and his company survived, and all the contracts just concentrated on them, and they make tons of money, and so they're quite happy. And so that's, I think it's just one case to show that actually most of the business, they want to compete, fairly, but the old mechanism just simply wouldn't quite allow that to happen. So we need to, of course, we need to strengthen the enforcement. In the meantime, I hope that all those brands who buy from China, all those investors who invest in China could also join the efforts, not just wait there to see that, unless you have a rule of law set up in China, then I won't, I can't do anything. I basically just take advantage of the loopholes.
but there are ways for them to also join these efforts and to be part of the solutions. And that could be quite, they could have a big motivating power.
When you think about essentially the partnerships that you've built, you started as a journalist, so you're really looking for stories in a sense, and now you've become the story. So when you think of the successes that you've had, what jumps to mind? Is there a family? Is there a company? How do you tell the story of this success you're building?
Yeah, we managed to make some success, and one example, I just give to a few of the meetings with some Chicago, other visitors, is about the app. They asked me about how this app worked, and I show you that how people can identify the polluters and started sharing those violation records. It could be quite important because right after they disclosed the online monitoring data, we found that some of the companies are not in compliance. One of them is a major iron steel manufacturer, a listed company based in Shandong province. And we try to engage with them because their sulfur emission can be up to 10 times against the standards. They are, as a listed company, they have a public phone number, for their secretary of the board, and we call them, and his response is that as a listed company, this issue is simply not important to us. It's a very blatant statement, and we as an NGO, we don't have some of the choices our NGO folks has here in America. So our judicial system has yet to function like here, and you can't really do other things. But so we're a little bit frustrated. But then later on, we have the users of our app repeatedly tweet the violation records, and they started tagging in the Twitter account of the local environmental agency. And several months later, the agency tweeted back and saying that after checking this case, they penalized the company and require it to really fully fix those violation problems. And then another several months later, with all the continuous, micro-reporting going on, they tweeted back saying that the company decided to shut down 3 pellet furnaces. We trust it's because it's highly inefficient. So factor in all those pollution control costs, it's simply not viable. So they decided that it's time to shut it down. And the tweet carries a calculation of the reduction result: 2,600 tons of sulfur dioxide and 405 tons of particulates, those fine particles. 400 tons of PM 2.5. I don't know how many zeros you put. When you translate that, convert that into micrograms, it's a lot. Lot of particles, and I think it will be a great blessing to not just to the local people, but to the people in the region, because that city is also part of the airshed of Beijing is one of the cities. So 30 cities put together is in the same airshed, and discharge from the factories like that are 60 to 80% of the total emission of air emission. And the reason behind that is because we have too big a capacity of this energy and pollution-intensive industries concentrated there. Just one example, in another neighboring city called Tangshan, I checked its steel manufacturing output. That single city's output is slightly larger than the output of the United States. It's just like that. I was told by Brian that even in the 60s when the steel output, when Chicago has the steel mills, and you also had some haze, right? Even in a windy city like this. And we are in a basin, basically in Beijing. So that region, is sometimes it's not very favorable to disperse all this pollution. So you can imagine that's the source of our problem. So we have to tackle that. And I trust that ultimately we need the people to join the efforts. I think it is the people's voice that eventually changed even the national policy. And before the disclosure of PM 2.5 in the year 2013, most of our cities surrounding Beijing have their plan to continue to increase the coal consumption. Our coal consumption got tripled in 11 years of time from the year 2000. So that's the major source of local pollution and global carbon footprint. And the original plan is for that to be doubled before we peak in 2040. We can sustain, the world can sustain. And after, the government respond to people's demand for clean air and disclose PM 2.5, they made a 10-point action plan against air pollution from the year 2013 and factor in the requirement to curb the coal consumption, restructure the dirty industries. These are the toughest policy choices. Finally, this has been, we overcome that barrier. And ever since that year, of course, along with some economic downturn, our coal consumption stagnated and over the past several years continued to decline slightly. Not enough, but at least the trend now is getting more positive.
When you started us, you had some pictures, and one of them shows the dramatic change in air quality. You can't actually see. And our talk tonight actually has the word blue skies in it. What were the skies like when you were a young boy, and what are they like now?
Yeah, I was born in Qingdao. I grew up in Beijing, and I still remember when I was young, we had some dust storm during the spring, time where we had the Gobi Desert, some dust coming up. But other than that, blue sky every day, and we're a kingdom of bicycles, and there are a lot of bugs and insects. That's what I remember. I learned to swim, in the local canal. Of course, later on, it's sometimes dried up, sometimes turned to open sewer, and so there has been some real change. We have suddenly, our skylines almost like look those in Chicago. We probably have higher buildings built, under construction than some of your landmark. And so that has been a remarkable change. And during the process, of China's vast economic growth, hundreds of millions have been pulled out of poverty. That's a great, great achievement. But in the meantime, even now with 5 years of pollution control efforts, still 3/4 of our cities cannot meet with the air quality standards. The data itself, if you listen, you may not feel that, but as parents, we, really worried about our family, our children. I remember I had more quarrel with my, son that because sometimes he just want to go out to play, and in the weekend, and I have to lock him indoor, and he want to play football. He loved football and biking, but just that's just not quite healthy. And so it's very, very painful. And of course, I also got more privilege to have chance to travel, do some investigation in those early days. And I can see, especially in the countryside, some of the villages later on have been dubbed as cancer villages because of the water pollution. They experience high rate of diseases, including cancer. I've been to quite a few of them, and so sometimes people, when in the supply chain investigation, I experienced those moments that the villagers are they kneel down and they really cry for help. And we as an organization have very limited resources, no power, but I can only assure them in my mind that we will help them to spread the message, to have their voice heard, a voice lost in this massive growth and development, in this massive globalized manufacturing and sourcing practice. And I trust that information is a way to reconnect this missing dots and have everyone to be more aware of this, and this could create a better sense of responsibility, and it could also eventually help to rebuild that mechanism of accountability that we all eventually have to have.
When you were talking about some of the sources of pollution, you were talking about coal. And that's obviously linked both to local air quality and it's linked to global questions with climate change. How is the population in China thinking these days about climate? And does that make you optimistic?
Yeah, if we look at the survey, then I'm very optimistic because the new national polling released right before the Bonn COP meeting, just several weeks ago, shows that 94% of the respondents support China to stick to the Paris Agreement commitment, even with President Trump decided to withdraw. And but when you look further into those follow-up questions, you realize that the number one concern is for the climate change to even worsen the air pollution problem. And so they still link these two together, and sometimes maybe there's some misunderstanding because that may not be the highest impact. However, people tend to think that way, and in some way they're right because the source of the local pollution and the global climate change, as you pointed out, they are the similar sources. Burning half of the world's coal, that's the source, of major problems. So we have to tackle that. And at this moment, I think people support China to stick to the commitment is because they want to really address the local pollution problem. Of course, they also care about the climate, but I think this local concerns have helped China, the government and Chinese people to make this a kind of an easier choice. Otherwise, when the China and U.S. almost like we too are decided to join hands. When President Obama engaged President Xi and try to work together on this, and all of a sudden one of them pulled out, and China was suddenly put on the driver's seat in an unexpected way, and there will be you're going to expect some tough debate and discussion, like during the Copenhagen. This is our rights to develop and all of this. But as I said, the 2011 that decision to give people the facts about the PM 2.5 and let people know about how serious our smog, our pollution is, really help pave the way, to make it easier for all this choice to be made, and almost like this is, irreversible. You can't, we just have to do it. Yeah.
And you now have millions of downloads of your app. When you started, there was no such thing as an app. And so when you look at this now, is that the first thing people talk about when they meet you?
Yeah. Increasingly, people started talking about the app. Yes, in those early days, I only have the traditional way, the writing some articles and putting them into a book. Everything's on paper, and I still remember in those early days to do that, I have to again go to our national library to check things, check the data, and do all the clippings. I don't know if anyone, the young we have the journalist schools students and professors. Professor, you must know that, but maybe they won't know. Every day, just clip all this and put them into a file manually, so that you can have, you can refer to them. It's very important in your writing. But then, take advantage of vast development of internet. The time that we decided that three of us can decide to do a national pollution database, that's only possible because we have internet, and then we see China leapfrog into the information age. Suddenly everyone started having a cell phone, and the mobile internet become possible, and we decided to take advantage of that. But I remember we held that for 2 years, because by studying the nature of app, we realized it's very special. It's not like website. You put it there, someone gonna have chance to visit that. But for an app, if they don't download and keep that in their cell phone, they don't delete it, then it's no use. You ended up spending all the resources and very, very limited usage, unless you can provide a day-to-day service to them. In some way, ironically, checking the air quality data is almost like important to check your weather forecast, like here. And so back home, we happen to compile the most comprehensive air quality data, so that gives us an opportunity to provide a useful service, and then we combine that with those monitoring data of the factories. That's not a hard need from the people, but because they want the air quality data, and sometimes when they see the smog really hit, and they feel long stretch of smoggy days, and people lost their patience. Before they could get angry, but now they can use their energy to do something else, to kind of identify who are polluting and tweet it, and at least people create some easier channel for them to get involved. And so I think that all this development of IT technologies are really a blessing to a country like China. When the U.S. started its transparency program, I remember I read that in the 1970s with environmental EIS. I think they need to send letters to each of the one that they need to resort to, need to consult to, all the communities, with a very high cost. At that time, so this cannot be copied in developing countries. But all of a sudden, this new technology have knocked off the cost of communication. And now with the app, for the first time, we're no longer dependent on the media, on the mass media to cross our message. Very unreliable these days, but we suddenly got our own way to cross message to millions of users for the first time. And the beauty of that, it's also interactive.
That is the ideal segue for me to say, you've taught us so much tonight about what your work has been, about data, but also really about engaging people for solutions. So with that, I'd love to open the conversation up, to bring the audience in and have a chance to ask some questions more broadly. Please ask a quick question, and then we'll try to get an opportunity to have some good answers. And Mike is coming your way.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk, Mr. Ma. It's very inspiring and informative. And I noticed most of the discussion has been about the interaction between the organization and the companies and the people, the general public. But as we know, in China, the government plays a really important role. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the interaction between your NGO or environmental NGOs in general, and the Chinese government. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. Government is one of the most important stakeholders in China, and environmental NGOs started roughly more than 20 years ago, with the registration of the first group like the Friends of Nature. And in those early days, I would say, the relationship sometimes could be there could be some real tension, especially those grassroots, in their relationship with the local government. Even us, 10 years ago, experienced some difficulties with the local government who put GDP growth rate ahead of environmental protection. But through these years, gradually, I think that we have witnessed some change, and the rhetoric have changed, and then policy, and then the environmental target be integrated into the 5-year development plan, and now you probably know that it has been set as the 5 pillars of China's social economic development, environmental protection. They're even talking about building a new kind of eco-civilization to try to go beyond the industrial civilization. So it's very, very high target being set, and during the process, I think gradually they realized that NGOs could also be helpful, because when sometimes tens of thousands of people take to the street to in demonstration to some of the polluting factories, they realize it's better to have some organization to organize it, to have more organized participation, and to especially for it to be put on the science-based, data-driven way of participation, rather than allow everyone to go panic and sink into chaos. So no society can sustain that way of chaos. So there's a better understanding of that in China, and our relationship with the government started with the data. Our data comes from the government. As I said, we decided to use government monitoring data as the sources, and I would say with the central government, the relationship is always quite positive, because in China, the central government really want to bring this pollution under control. They know it's public health damage, the resource not sustainable, and stability issues, and all this global impact, and they want to manage that. But sometimes they have a hard time to try to really coordinate and the local government to do it, and so we're okay with them, and now even more so. The space is really getting bigger, and throughout these years, there's an increasing recognition of the importance of participation and transparency work. One clear evidence is the new environmental protection law, which has been amended the first time in 25 years. This law put a special chapter 5 titled Transparency and Public Participation. This is the first ever legislation to have that chapter in our history. It happened to be an environmental law. So it just shows the kind of a consensus built around this. And I'm most happy to see some of the local government, local government in Shandong, in province like Zhejiang, and in Beijing, they now become more proactive. I remember one meeting with the head of the Shandong EPB, provincial EPB, and that province have 100 million people, burning 400 million tons of coal. That's half of the U.S. total consumption. so highly intensive. And they have, we have more kind of polluting, red dots in our app than any other. So after we launched the app, we got a phone call from them. They said that the head of our agency want to meet you, and so I was a little bit nervous. I thought he gonna being there. I thought he gonna before pressure us to remove those records and something like that. But then he told me that, to my surprise, saying that, look, I've been ordered to control the air pollution, and now we have so much going on, and it's very difficult. So I trust that this app like this could be helpful, and I only need you to help convince the society that to have so many red dots there doesn't mean we're not doing our duty. So I suggest that he will also publish his requirements for these companies to fix, and the deadline for them to solve their problems. So he did that, and they follow each of this tweeting, microblog, micro reporting, and so you can see that relations like this, it's hard to imagine like before. And Karen mentioned earlier about this reporting. From the beginning of this year, we had another progress made. For the first time, our app has been interconnected with the 2 ministries' reporting platform against dirty rivers. This is the first step for our 10-point action plan against water pollution. And they realized there's so many rivers, 2,100 of them on the list, so it's very hard for the government to keep an eye on that. So they decided to tap into the app. And so from now on, our users can take a picture and upload into the app, but directly into the government platform. And those responses given by the government, the following up checks, those results will also be displayed on the app in an open way.
Speaking of apps, I have this online tool. It's interesting. The first question links directly to what you just said, and it's how effective is citizen reporting in generating awareness? And you talked about this app, and I'd love to know your perspective on the role of the citizen. How is that changing?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and there has been some channel for citizens to report polluting problems in China, because when the enforcement's weak, there are so many violators and polluters, and you don't have the legal channel quite open for citizens to file litigation against them. So in China, there's always been a grievance channel, and people are allowed to write letters to the agencies, and then some of them started creating the hotlines, and then they set up some internet web page, for that. But all of this have one problem, that you are an individual, and then you try to file these complaints into an agency, and if they choose not to respond, you can't do anything. You can't go to the court, and so you just you can only be frustrated. But with this app, with in combination with Twitter, Chinese Weibo, all these are open. What you file this complaints in an open way, and it can be retweeted. You can sometimes attract large amount of people. In Chinese we call 围观. You just everyone can watch this whole process. So it's created another different dynamic. In some cases, we have the local agencies sometimes tell us that they're happy with this because it gives them the backing to engage with even the most powerful, sometimes state-owned enterprises located in their region, saying that it's not me who want to create troubles, it's the people who continue to file these complaints. It's all on my, Twitter account, and I have to take action. Otherwise, I'm going to be viewed as failing my duty. And so I think, all this social, new media have for the first time created the possibility in our country to have a rather direct interaction between the people and the government. Although I have to say it's still quite limited. Environment is still a special area, not on all the other social aspects. But in this area, we happen to have the most consensus built, and even the government is now talking about some terminology called multi-stakeholder governance. It's still in all the party documents, in the 5-year plan, and that's very unusual in our situation. And I hope that this alternative way to allow people to be involved, to be informed and involved in decision making, could prove that it's even in China it's doable.
With that, I think we have time for one more question, and I know we've taken one from the live stream and one for the live audience. I'd love to go back to the live audience for one last question. Sure. So mic coming your way.
Oh, thank you. Hi. What do you think the line is between citizen reporting, like through your app and Twitter and Weibo, and citizen activism? And do you think that this kind of use of data and transparency to sort of pressure companies will set a precedent for other types of activism in China?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've talked about all this participation through the app and based on the data. That's definitely not the only way. We have at this moment hundreds of NGOs quite active in China. So and not just NGOs, but independent foundations giving support to those NGOs. So there has been rising capacity, and they are taking all different their own efforts. Some of them we work together, and some of them have their own way to tackle this issue. Despite the difficulties on litigation, NGOs, including us, got the status to file public interest litigation in China for the first time, allowed by the new environmental protection law. And some of them are quite determined, trying over and over again to do that. We are not specialized in that, so our role is to help them identify who to sue, because we keep all this data, so we can identify who are the worst polluters, and then also help them provide evidence. To our great satisfaction, the evidence based on the hourly disclosure data have been accepted by the court in several cases in China. So this is a new progress made, and we're more than happy to continue that. And quite some of them are also working on their local, on those on-site investigation. So we're mutually beneficial because we can support them with the monitoring data, so that they have the basis, to engage with those companies, and they can also help us with those to combine that with on-site investigation with all the findings. And so there are many other ways, many ways to participate. But I trust that at the end of the day, we all, could be hugely benefited by the expansion of transparency. To tap into these vast resources of tens of thousands of monitoring done by the government used to be not accessible to the public, and much of that not put into use. Before we got the real-time disclosure of online monitoring data, those data has been in existence for 10 years, but not really put even put use almost like a toll, despite the fact that it cost billions of yuan to install those monitors, devices. They're not put in use because those biggest factories which install this, most of them are very favored by the local government who interfere with the enforcement. But after that, at this moment, we're happy to see the new kind of legislation coming locally and even nationally, started taking that as a very important source of a basis for penalty fines, for imposing penalty fines, including daily penalty fines.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Dr. Scholl Foundation. We've been honored to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.